Ken Saro-Wiwa, writer and activist in Nigeria, executed in 1995 after standing up against oil companies, pushing for equal rights for the people in the Niger Delta. Now, almost 20 years later, Ken Saro-Wiwa's family and the Ogoni speak out.
It's amazing how he's put Ogoni land on the map.
He made the invisible visible. I never imagined this, and I never imagined that even 20 years later the thing would still be so painful as if it happened yesterday.
The older I get, the more I really appreciate my father's bravery. You know, you're aware of these things at 19.
It's almost like yesterday, first of all. That's each time Ken Saro-Wiwa's name is mentioned, or there's a reference to the Ogoni, you know, people, their new leadership, etc. I just have the image of Ken before me.
Bane, a village in the heart of Nigeria's Niger Delta. This house has the grave of writer and activist Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was executed by the Nigerian military government in 1995. A mile away, there is still his house, next to the one of his mother. Ken Saro-Wiwa was born in 1941 in nearby Bori as the son of Chief Jim Wiwa and his wife, Jessie. We are in Ogoni land, in the Niger Delta. With its 650 square kilometers, it is the size of Greater London. Here live the Ogoni, a minority of 500,000 people marginalized by the ruling ethnic groups in Nigeria, being the Yoruba, the Hausa Fulani, and the Igbo. Ken Saro-Wiwa comes from the Ogoni community. Their minority position made it easy for the government to start oil exploration through joint ventures with mainly Shell. When Ken was 17, he all of a sudden saw pipelines emerging, gas flares, and oil spills. This disturbance made him angry, and he started sending protest letters to newspapers. This ignited Ken's interest in writing, and he wanted to go and study English, but was halted by the Biafra War, which raged in the Niger Delta from 1967 until 1970. Then, using his wits, Ken Saro-Wiwa became an administrator for the local government, but got fired because of raising attention for the oil companies exploiting his Ogoni land. Then, to make his daily bread, he ended up in real estate in Port Harcourt.
He was forced into business, which is not something he had any natural appetite for. And it became a moderately successful businessman. And he could have been much more successful because he was close to all of the Nigeria's rulers and the elites at that time, and he could have used that as advantages, but for reasons best known to himself, he didn't.
The turnaround for Ken Saro-Wiwa came in the 1990s when, again, desperate for income, he started producing the sitcom Bassi and Company, using the experience he acquired from having produced radio plays earlier on. It was a parody on the corrupt Nigerian society and is still the best viewed television show in Nigeria ever.
You want to be a millionaire, behave like a millionaire, act like a millionaire, millions will be yours.
Once he'd made a little bit of money, he now started writing, he took up the pen again, he started writing a column in newspapers, and things were beginning to pick up again.
In his new books, he criticized the corrupt government and his concern about minorities like the Ogoni. But despite the changing fortune, his son Ken says his father was unhappy.
He felt frustrated because, he wasn't published outside of Nigeria. He had to self-publish, and his ideas were not getting much traction. Even though 30 million people were watching Bassi and Company, and even though he was writing a column in the Sunday Times, in Punch, in Vanguard.
Bad luck shifted his trajectory indefinitely.
When he lost a manuscript of a novel that he had written, which he wanted to use to introduce to a wider audience outside, he was hoping it would be published outside of Nigeria, and then from there he could then probably sort of introducing his politics. He lost the novel. He just felt, okay, maybe he was not meant to be a writer. And then he now became an environmental activist. And he realized that what he'd been all this time was actually an environmental activist.
Almost like being reborn, Ken Saro-Wiwa took on the oil industry because none of the millions of petrodollars flowed back into Ogoni land, with its lack of schools and hospitals. This had Ken co-founding MOSOP, the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people. And in 1990, they presented to the government their demands in the Ogoni Bill of Rights.
Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people. Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people. Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people. Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people.
Ken Saro-Wiwa first had shown the Ogoni Bill of Rights to writer Wole Soyinka, who is the 1986 winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. Ken Jr., then 14 years old, remembers he gladly joined, but wasn't aware that his father was going to present the Ogoni Bill of Rights.
My father never wasted an opportunity to start talking about the Ogoni issue. So there I was saying, here he is talking about this thing again. And I just said, look, I wanted him to finish his business. Let me talk to my father's hero.
Well, I remember when I was around, I think maybe 12 or 13, he showed us this book, and it was called the Ogoni Bill of Rights. And obviously at that age, it meant nothing to me. It was just a very boring political document, but he was really passionate about it.
Oh, they'd done their homework, and they'd also done their plan for the future of the Ogoni people. It wasn't a kind of declaration which was long on ideology. No, it was a kind of ethnic view at an uncomfortable association, but based on the principles of justice and also on the unequal distribution of resources of the nation, especially oil.
Ken Saro-Wiwa started to sacrifice more and more time for the Ogoni issue. His children noticed it began to overtake him.
Whenever we went down to the village to see our grandparents, on the way to the village, he would point out all the gas flares and the environmental degradation. And again, we would look and nod and, not think very much of it. But, he was really fired up about this, very angry about it. And so that's when, things started to change, and you'd hear him on the phone talking to friends and colleagues, and was constantly talking about oil and pollution and government corruption.
In my late teens, I was very aware that he had become obsessed by this issue. He didn't talk about anything else. People would come to the house, and that's what they would be talking about.
When the government didn't respond to the Ogoni Bill of Rights, MOSOP summoned the oil companies to pay royalties to the Ogoni or otherwise leave. When again there was no response, MOSOP called for a mass demonstration And on January 4th in 1993, 300,000 Ogoni took to the streets.
That day, what my father had achieved in 2-3 years is that he'd managed to get everybody, the community, the collective had found their voice and their identity and their pride back. And he always said that that was his greatest achievement. And he wrote that if he died that day, he would have died a happy man.
As a result of the protest, the unthinkable happened. A giant-like shell discontinued its million-dollar operation in Ogoniland. Ken Saro-Wiwa was arrested for having caused civil unrest, but was released after 1 month. Then, in 1994 in Ogoniland, a group of elders was murdered by unknown assailants, and Ken Saro-Wiwa was arrested again and brought before a military tribunal. And then Nigerian dictator Sani Abacha ordered his execution, which at the time was usual against anyone standing up against the state. This took place in the Port Harcourt prison on the 10th of November 1995. Only 2.5 years after the Great Demonstration of 1993. Alfred Ilere is a member of Mossop. At the time of Ken's execution, he was in the same Port Harcourt prison for having campaigned against the government. Alfred, from his cell, could hear the statement Ken Saro-Wiwa made before he was brought to the gallows.
He said, what sort of country is this that delights in the killing of its illustrious citizens? What have I done to deserve death? Other that I spoke the truth and speaking for the rights of my people. If it be that by my death my people can be free, Lord, allow me to die. Take my soul, but the struggle continues.
The execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa was condemned by the national and the international community. By then, he was already internationally famous because of Shell's pullout of Ogoniland and his courage to stand up against the military rulers.
I said yesterday that I thought this was a fraudulent trial, a bad verdict, an unjust sentence, and it has now been followed by judicial murder.
I think in Africa are full of disgust at what has happened. And it is not only horrifying, but utter disrespect for all of us who have tried to assist Nigeria to come out of this difficult situation in which it finds itself.
Saro-Wiwa's son, Ken Jr., together with Nobel Prize laureate Wole Soyinka, were at a Commonwealth summit in New Zealand to lobby against the execution of his father and for the Ogoni case. But the execution came too unexpected. Ken was asleep in a hotel and was woken up by a friend.
And so when I heard a knock on the door around 5 a.m., 4 or 5 a.m., it was dawn because I could hear the birds now singing and a few cars going past my window. And Richard Bula, this Australian activist who's been with us all this for months and been with me, been my sort of guide throughout that period. I opened the door and he was there and I could see it on his face, And he just told me and I just turned around and started just absent-mindedly getting dressed, So you're just still pushing the thing away, just very businesslike. I've got to pack my clothes, I have to leave. I didn't even think about where I was going. I think whatever he was saying about flights, I just wasn't listening.
So I was still at university. I was shopping. I went out to central London and bought some food. In those days, there weren't any mobile phones, and so I was away from my house all day. I came back about 7 o'clock in the evening, and my flatmate left a note saying I should call my mother. And that's when I knew something had happened. So I called my mother, and then she told me. And so I then took a train back to my mother's house.
I knew in my heart of hearts that I knew Abacha. I'd studied Abacha, and I'd studied, in addition to everything else, he was a natural-born sadist, if such beings exist. And I knew that if some stern warning was not given from the Commonwealth as a state, he was going to carry out those executions. So I had, like Ken did, a really powerful sense of desperation.
The execution had Nigeria expelled from the Commonwealth for 3 years, and it sent a shockwave through Ogoniland.
Oh, it galvanized the Ogoni people, to further their original aspirations. One thing it did not do was discourage a continuation of the struggle, although it was being prosecuted now in different ways.
Now, almost 20 years after Ken's execution, there is still no oil extraction in Ogoniland. From these wells, there is no oil flowing anymore to the pipelines that used to be there. But there is still the Trans-Niger pipeline transporting 150,000 barrels of oil per day from other oil fields. This 50-year-old pipeline occasionally breaks, and the leaked crude turned the wetlands into cinematic black and white scenery. And a few miles away, crude oil is floating in ponds amidst the maize and cassava fields. Norkai Deko, a 40-year-old farmer and mother of 3, says it affects her badly. The leader of a local council in Ogoniland notices these complaints across the region.
To suffer the impact because our lands, our waterways, our stream, our creek are affected, highly contaminated.
Shell always maintained that these spills are caused by sabotage. According to Charles Koya of a local development group, it's true that poor youth come to break pipelines hoping to sell crude, but he says that they are sent by the army groups guarding the delta.
There is that arrangement of them calling and inviting the community boys to come and help to break the pipeline so that they sell the oil for them. So when the community boys come and break the pipeline, then they become their boys, who, when they sell the export, the proceeds from the leakage will now go to the security people and the military people.
This ongoing pollution of Ogoniland makes that Ken Saro-Wiwa was not forgotten. His remains after the execution finally came home in 2005, when the Nigerian government released his body to be reburied in Bane. His 38-year-old daughter, Nu Saro-Wiwa, has vivid memories.
Yeah, we reassembled his skeleton and we put some of his personal effects with him in the coffin, so his pipe and his books, things like that. And yeah, it was traumatic at first. You know, we were crying and one of my sisters was screaming, but after a while, you know, you get used to it, and you know, at the end of the day, it's our father. It's not a macabre set of bones.
Cousin Harry Wiwa, who lives in Bane, says that still many people come and visit.
I would say that every November 10th of every other year, people come to Bane here and visit this family and the gravesite, where they pay their respect to their hero. And students on research do come here time without number from various institutions.
In Port Harcourt, on 24 Agri Road, there is still his office that is turned into a private museum by the family. Sami Falana is the custodian.
A lot of people hold him to be our hero because we have not seen that kind of vocal and bold leader that comes out, abandon property, abandon money, family, only to lay his life for some of us to speak out, and that is why we take him so very serious.
Ken's Mosop is also still there. Lekborsi Piakbara is the president, and he says that Ken's legacy is alive.
I don't think there's any Ogoni child growing up that don't talk about Ken Saro-Wiwa even to this day, even when they were not born, when he was kid. And to the average Ogoni person, the memory of Ken Saro-Wiwa continue, to ring, especially when some of the issues he raised, almost all the issues he raised about Ogoni people, about the Nigerian state, is coming to be the issues that are occupying current discourses at the moment.
A highlight for Mosop was the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, coming to Ogoniland for an assessment. The 2011 findings showed toxic contamination of drinking water, widespread degradation of mangrove forests, pollution of farmlands, all because of oil spills over decades. The UNEP concludes that restoring the environment would require the biggest cleanup operation ever. Taking 30 years at an initial cost of $1 billion. For the Ogoni, this is the ultimate proof that Ken Saro-Wiwa was right.
Today we have a scientific study that are proving that the claims of the Ogoni people that the environment were destroyed or have been destroyed by long-year oil extraction have been proven scientifically that damage has been done.
But not so much has been done with the UNEP report, and the cleanup hasn't started yet. This feeds frustration among the Ogoni.
I will do it. I'll call you later. Bye-bye.
Ken Jr., who works for the current democratic government in the capital, Abuja, feels obliged to continue the struggle of his father.
You equally become frustrated because these are my people. This is what my father died for, you hope it doesn't go on much longer because people are getting angry and frustrated, and it becomes, it's almost as if the cycle. We've almost gone full cycle again, and that's why I continue within government to make representations on this issue, that this is important. We must raise this as a priority issue.
Mosop is preparing new demonstrations in Abuja to maintain attention for Ogoniland. Piak Bara says the sentiments are still strong.
Up to this moment, majority of Ogoni people still believe strongly that Ken set them on a path for Ogoni redemption, which they are all committed to, until perhaps those issues are resolved.
And also on literary level, there is activity boiling in the region. 36-year-old Obari Gomba is a Niger Delta poet publishing on Ogoniland.
The title of this poem is No Leaf Falls. It's a poem that I've dedicated to Ken Saro-Wiwa. Evergreen. No leaf falls from our tall grave. We stand here as the phalanx of fate. We mull over the lessons from your dead. You're not a saint, you're not a villain. You're just a true tragedian.
Obari Gomba campaigns merely by writing. But for Ken Saro-Wiwa, that was not good enough.
For him, writers cannot just be apart from society, just talking about, writing lovely words and things. You have to engage with the society. You have to communicate. That's the point of writing. It's telling a story, and by telling the story, you captivate the audience, and you move the audience to make that change.
Obari Gomba doesn't rule out that he might also turn into activism.
Yes, because if things do not change, and you keep pushing that things should change, then there could come a time when you want to invest a greater deal of involvement to bring about change. Okay, it's difficult to sit at one point and say that you are going to live in the same mode all through the rest of your life. No, there could be a point in my life, in my development as a person, when I will see the need for a large-scale mass mobilization.
Meanwhile, there is progress to be reported for the Ogoni. Shell, in 2009, settled a court case pushed by a group of American lawyers by paying $15.5 million compensation to the Ogoni community.
I think the settlement really, it represented a victory of sorts in that all companies can no longer operate with the sort of impunity that they had in the past. And, you know, we owe everything to my father for that. He really put the agenda of Ogoni and pollution on the political map.
But with the UNEP recommendations unimplemented, comes the question whether Ken Saro-Wiwa's struggle and sacrifice made a difference.
It made a difference for Ogoni, it made a difference for Niger Delta, to Nigeria, to the entire energy mix, you know, because it raised awareness, not that it was the only area that was experiencing this kind of issue, but it just raised awareness that these were critical and important issues that needed different approaches. At that time, these were invisible minorities. You could come and drill oil on ancestral lands. There were a few people on the lands, but they was regarded very much as collateral damage or accidental to the main thing, which was to extract hydrocarbons.
The country had become successfully sensitized to the struggle. That's what I'm trying to say, that it was no longer an Ogoni struggle. It was both an international recognition and Nigeria's own recognition of the situation in Ogoni land.
I think my father's legacy, the biggest difference he made was that he gave minorities in Nigeria a voice, which just hadn't happened before. You know, the country's been dominated by the three biggest ethnic groups, and they held all the political power, and everyone else was really just on the margins. And my father has changed that.
It became a wake-up call to the rest of the world and to the other nationalities of the Niger Delta. It became a wake-up call. You find out that from the moment when Saro-Wiwa was executed, the Niger Delta became a global concern.
Sitam, ya Ogoni sitam, ile yira konyo we asiyan yi balo, pia Ogoni balo.